On March 13, 1964, in the Kew Gardens neighborhood of Queens, New York, a 28-year-old woman named Kitty Genovese was walking home from work at 3 a.m. A man with a knife attacked her. She screamed, she fought, she called for help. The attack lasted 35 minutes. 38 people in the surrounding apartment buildings heard or witnessed some part of what happened. Not one called the police until it was over. When reporters asked the witnesses why, the answers were almost identical. I didn't want to get involved. I thought someone else would call. I assumed it had already been handled. The story became a national scandal, a symbol of urban apathy, of the coldness of modern life, of what cities do to human beings. Two psychologists read the story and reached a completely different conclusion. They didn't think it was about apathy at all. They thought it was about mathematics. John Darley was a social psychologist at New York University. Bibb Latané was at Columbia. They read the Genovese news reports in 1964 and felt something that most people didn't feel. Not outrage, curiosity. If 38 people saw it, Darley said to Latané, why did none of them act? Was it that all 38 were unusually cold? Or is there something about 38 that is fundamentally different from one? The question they were really asking was this: is there a social mathematics of helping? Does the number of bystanders change the probability that any one of them will act? And if so, does more people watching mean more help? Or less? The answer they found was one of the most counterintuitive results in the history of social psychology. And it has implications for every emergency, every crowd, every moment when something is wrong and people are watching. Darley and Latané designed their first experiment in 1968. Participants were brought to a laboratory and told they would be discussing college life with other students over an intercom system. To preserve anonymity, they were told, they would each be in separate rooms. In reality, each participant was alone. The other voices were recordings. The discussion began normally. Then one voice, another student, began to speak erratically. He mentioned having epilepsy. Then his speech became increasingly strained. He began to say he was having a seizure. His voice became choked, incoherent. Then, silence. The question was simple. Would the participant leave their room to get help? In one condition, the participant believed they were the only other person in the conversation. One witness, one person who knew. In another condition, they believed there were 5 others also listening. 6 people total who knew about the seizure. When participants believed they were the only witness, 85% left the room to get help. Almost immediately, when participants believed 5 others were also listening, only 31% sought help. Same emergency, same recording, same fake seizure. More witnesses, dramatically less help. Darley and Latané identified 2 distinct mechanisms driving this effect. The first they called diffusion of responsibility. When you are the only witness to an emergency, the full weight of moral responsibility rests on you alone. If I don't act, no one will. This is entirely on me. That weight is uncomfortable. But it is motivating. When there are multiple witnesses, that weight is distributed. Someone else will probably call. There are 5 other people who know. The responsibility is shared. Each individual's felt share of responsibility decreases as the number of witnesses increases. The math is brutal in its simplicity. 6 witnesses, each carries 1/6 of the responsibility. The threshold for action never gets crossed. Not because anyone decided not to help. Because the psychological weight that would have motivated action was diluted to below the level required. The second mechanism they called pluralistic ignorance. In an ambiguous situation, people look to others to understand what is happening. If you see smoke coming from under a door, you look around. Are others concerned? Are others moving toward the exit? If everyone around you appears calm, you interpret that as information. It's probably not serious. If it were, people would be moving. The problem is, everyone else is doing exactly the same thing. Looking at you for cues. Seeing your calm face. Interpreting it as information. Everyone is reading everyone else's calmness as evidence that the situation is not an emergency, while everyone is faking calmness because they're not sure if it's an emergency. A room full of people, each individually alarmed, each appearing calm to the others, each taking the other's apparent calm as evidence that there is nothing to be alarmed about. Mutual reassurance through mutual deception. Producing collective inaction. Darley and Latané ran a second experiment that became equally famous. Participants were brought into a waiting room to fill out a questionnaire. While they worked, smoke began to drift into the room from under a door. Not real fire, staged smoke, but realistic enough. In the alone condition, 75% of participants reported the smoke within 4 minutes. Fast, clear, decisive action. In the group condition, 3 people in the room together, only 38% reported the smoke at all. Many sat in the increasingly smoky room for the full 6 minutes of the experiment without reporting anything. Some participants, when interviewed afterward, said they had noticed the smoke but assumed it was steam or air conditioning or some kind of chemical the experiment needed. They had looked at the other participants, seen no alarm, invented an explanation that justified inaction. Pluralistic ignorance in real time. In one particularly striking variant, the 3 people in the room were all confederates of the experimenters. Actors instructed to appear completely calm, regardless of how much smoke filled the room. In this condition, only 10% of real participants reported the smoke. 90% sat in a visibly smoky room and did nothing, because everyone around them appeared unconcerned. Here we need to pause. Because the Kitty Genovese story, as it was reported in 1964, was not entirely accurate. Investigative research published decades later, most comprehensively by journalist Jim Reisenbergen in his 2004 book American Witness, found that the original New York Times account significantly overstated both the number of witnesses and their awareness of what was happening. Several people did call the police. Some witnesses saw only fragments of the attack and genuinely didn't understand what was occurring. The 38 witnesses did nothing. Narrative was partly a construction, amplified by a reporter and an editor who recognized a powerful story. Darley and Latané later acknowledged that the Genovese case may not have been a clean example of the bystander effect. But here is what remained true. Their laboratory experiments, conducted rigorously, with controls replicated dozens of times across different cultures, demonstrated the effect clearly and consistently. The bystander effect is real. The Kitty Genovese story may have been distorted, but the phenomenon the story inspired researchers to study turned out to be genuinely, reliably, measurably real, and understanding it has saved lives. Once you understand the bystander effect, your behavior in emergencies changes. This is one of the rare cases in psychology where knowing the mechanism provides a partial inoculation against it. The technique developed from Darley and Latané's work is now taught in first aid courses, safety training programs, and bystander intervention workshops worldwide. It is called singling out. If you are in an emergency and need help, do not shout into a crowd. Do not say, "Someone call an ambulance." Find a specific person. Make eye contact. Point directly at them. Say, "You, the person in the red jacket, call an ambulance right now." By naming a specific person, you collapse the diffusion of responsibility. You transfer the full weight of moral obligation onto a single individual. And research shows that this works. Dramatically and consistently. The diffusion of responsibility only functions when the responsibility is diffuse. Make it specific, and the bystander effect dissolves. This is why emergency responders are trained to give direct, named commands in crisis situations. You, call this number. You, press here. You, get me a defibrillator. Not because people are lazy or cruel. Because human psychology requires a specific name before it accepts the full weight of responsibility. The digital age has created something that Darley and Latané could not have anticipated. A bystander situation with not 38 witnesses, but 38 million. Every viral video of someone in distress. every live stream of an emergency, every comment section beneath a post where someone is clearly asking for help, operates by exactly the same mathematics. The more people who see it, the less any individual feels responsible. Millions of people are watching this. Someone will do something. There are people better placed than me to act. It's probably already been handled. Diffusion of responsibility at the scale of the internet. Studies have shown that people in distress who post on social media often receive thousands of likes and comments expressing concern, and very few concrete offers of real help. The engagement itself becomes a substitute for action. The like, the share, the outraged comment, each one performing concern while diffusing the responsibility to do something about it. The 38 neighbors in Queens in 1964 have been replaced by 38 million people watching on their phones. The mathematics are the same. The stakes are sometimes higher. The bystander effect is not universal. Research has identified consistent conditions under which it weakens or disappears entirely. Perceived danger to the victim increases helping. When the emergency is unambiguous and severe, the effect shrinks dramatically. Bystanders are more likely to help someone having a heart attack than someone who appears drunk. Similarity to the victim increases helping. The in-group empathy we discussed in the last video interacts with the bystander effect. You are more likely to act for someone who is more like you. Rural versus urban settings. Studies consistently show that helping behavior is higher in smaller communities than in cities, not because city dwellers are colder, but because urban density means there are almost always more bystanders. The diffusion is structural. Prior relationship to the victim. If you know the person, even slightly, diffusion of responsibility diminishes sharply. Anonymity is the condition in which it flourishes. Training and role identity. Doctors, nurses, and trained first responders show dramatically reduced bystander effect in their areas of expertise. The professional role assigns responsibility that cannot be diffused, which suggests something important. The bystander effect is not a fixed feature of human nature. It is a default that specific conditions can override, and knowing those conditions is itself one of those conditions. There is a final piece of this story that almost never gets told. In 2019, researchers from the University of Copenhagen analyzed CCTV footage of real violent incidents in the Netherlands, South Africa, and England. They wanted to know, do bystanders actually intervene? The popular assumption, reinforced by the Genovese myth, is that they don't. The data showed otherwise. In 91% of public conflicts captured on CCTV, at least one bystander intervened. Not passively, not with a phone call. Physically intervened. Stepped in, pulled people apart, shielded victims. The researchers concluded that the bystander effect, as measured in controlled laboratory settings, may be significantly weaker in real-world situations where the emergency is unambiguous and physical intervention is possible. The Darley and Latané experiments used ambiguity as a key design element. The smoke could be steam. The seizure voice was disembodied. Real emergencies are often less ambiguous. And real people, more often than the popular narrative suggests, act. The bystander effect is real, but the narrative that humans are passive in crises is not entirely accurate either. We are more complex than either story allows. Think about the last time you saw something wrong, online or in person, and did nothing. Not because you didn't care, not because you were cruel, but because there were others present. Because someone else would probably handle it. Because you looked around and no one else was acting, and you interpreted that as a signal. That was the bystander effect. Running silently. Below your awareness. Producing an action from people who would have acted alone. Now think about the inverse. Think about a moment when you were the only one. No crowd, no diffusion, no signal from others. Just you and a situation that needed someone. And you acted. That was also you. The bystander effect describes a condition, not a character. And the most important thing Darley and Latané found was not that people failed to help. It was that the failure is systematic. predictable, consistent, mathematical, which means it can be understood, and understanding it changes the mathematics. Because the moment you know about diffusion of responsibility, you can refuse to let your share of it dissolve into the crowd. You can say, I am here. I see this is on me, and act accordingly. We've spent the last several videos inside some of the darkest corners of human social behavior. Obedience, conformity, dehumanization, inaction. Before we go further, I want to ask you something strange. Why are you clapping right now? You're not, obviously, but at some point today, maybe at a concert, a presentation, a sports event, you probably will. Or you already did. And if someone asked you why, you'd say, because I appreciated what I saw, because I wanted to show approval. That answer is true, but it's incomplete in a way that reveals something fascinating about how human behavior actually spreads. Clapping is contagious, not metaphorically, neurologically, mathematically, measurably contagious. Research published in 2013 showed that applause spreads through a crowd not based on how good the performance was, but based on social pressure dynamics that are almost identical to what Ash measured with his lines. And the moment a crowd stops clapping, the mathematics of that stopping follow a pattern so precise that it can be modeled as a phase transition in physics. Human behavior, even something as simple and joyful as putting your hands together, follows laws. Predictable, consistent, measurable. Why do we clap? And what does the answer tell us about every other behavior we think we're choosing freely? That is next.